The report was signed, and the suspension took effect immediately. A pilot who had diverted a flight to save a passenger's life was stripped of her wings and labeled a liability. Headlines mocked her as reckless, colleagues whispered that her career was over, and she carried her silence like a weight while the system punished her for compassion. But only 2 days later, when Air Force One descended on the same runway, the truth behind her decision would silence the nation. Flight 447 had been routine until the 43rd minute, when a passenger collapsed in the aisle. His breathing was faint, his pulse irregular. Panic spread through the cabin as children cried and passengers screamed. Flight attendants rushed for medical kits, their hands shaking. All eyes turned toward the cockpit. Captain Sarah Chin had flown for 23 years. She battled storms, landed planes with failing engines, and guided thousands safely home. But this decision wasn't about skill, it was about humanity. Chicago was still 90 minutes away. The nearest airfield was closer. Without hesitation, she turned the aircraft and called into the radio. "Tower, this is Flight 447 requesting emergency landing. Medical emergency on board." The descent was rough, crosswinds tugging at the plane, but she landed it safely. Paramedics rushed aboard, loaded the unconscious man onto a stretcher, and sped him to the hospital. Those saved minutes gave doctors the time they needed to keep him alive. His family would later learn that her choice had preserved his life. While passengers and loved ones were grateful, the airline's boardroom saw only numbers: 18 flights rerouted, $47,000 in costs, hundreds stranded. They ignored the life saved and focused instead on broken protocol. Policy dictated that only direct threats to aircraft safety justified diversion. A passenger's medical emergency didn't count. Papers were signed, and Chin was suspended for 30 days without pay. In a sterile office, she handed over her captain's wings. Some colleagues admired her, others mocked her, whispers trailing like smoke through the terminal. Reckless, some muttered. Emotional. Not fit for command. The pilot's bar turned her name into a cruel joke. Pull a chin. They'd laugh whenever someone suggested bending rules. Yet the man she saved, Harold Patterson, was alive in the ICU. His wife whispered thanks by his bedside, knowing that without Captain Chin, she would have been planning his funeral. But gratitude was drowned out by criticism, and Chin walked in silence, refusing to defend what she knew had been the right choice. Within hours, news stations painted her as a liability. Social media split, half condemning her as reckless, half praising her courage. Her name became a hashtag, her face a meme. She kept quiet, refusing interviews, choosing solitude over spectacle. Her silence was mistaken for guilt, but it was steadiness. Some truths, she knew, don't need defense. They defend themselves. Then, 48 hours later, everything changed. Air Force One was inbound. Security locked down the airfield, staff scrambling in confusion. The president had no scheduled meetings, no official reason to be there. Executives rehearsed their justifications for suspending her. When the president descended the stairs, cameras clicked wildly. He ignored the waiting executives and walked straight toward Captain Chin, standing at the edge of the crowd in her civilian jacket. He extended his hand and said clearly, "Captain Chen, on behalf of a grateful nation, thank you for your service and your courage." Then, before the stunned crowd, he pinned the Presidential Citizen Medal to her chest. The passenger she saved was no ordinary man. Harold Patterson was a decorated Marine gunnery sergeant, a veteran of 3 combat tours. By landing early, she had preserved not only his life, but a legacy of service. The president's words carried across the runway. Sometimes the greatest courage is knowing when rules serve people and when people transcend rules. His gaze fell on the airline executives, leaving no doubt who he meant. Her suspension was obliterated, not quietly overturned. She was reinstated with full honors and back pay. Her wings were returned at a public ceremony, veterans and media watching as applause filled the hall. Those who once mocked her now lowered their eyes. The insult "pull a chin" transformed into a phrase of respect. But she never gloated. When Captain Rodriguez, who had criticized her most harshly, came to apologize, she simply said, "You were protecting what you thought mattered most." That's what good pilots do. The airline tried to rewrite its story, using her example in advertisements, but the nation had already heard the truth. She returned to the cockpit quietly, her steady hands and calm voice unchanged. Passengers sensed her dignity. Flight attendants wanted to serve with her. Young pilots sought her mentorship, eager to learn what manuals could never teach. Harold Patterson recovered fully, welcomed home by his family, who continued to write letters of gratitude to the woman who gave them more time. His grandchildren would grow up knowing him because of her choice. Her story spread across airports and training programs, told and retold until it became legend. She never needed to argue, never needed to defend herself. The truth had landed, as surely as she had landed Flight 447. Her legacy was not in reports or headlines, but in the beating heart of Harold Patterson, in the laughter of his grandchildren, and in the quiet understanding that some decisions rise above policy. True honor, she learned, reveals itself in the hardest choices and proves itself through time.